Welcome to the Book Faire Podcast. This week we have an interview with Danna Smith. Danna is the author of more than 20 books for young readers. Next week, as always, we will have another episode covering new releases and stories relating to public schools and libraries. And next Friday, another interview. Now, let's get started with the show. Hello, Danna. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you start us off by just briefly introducing yourself and the title that we'll be discussing today?
Sure. My name is Danna Smith. I'm a children's book author. I've been writing for about 25 years. And the book we're talking about today is called Zenguin, illustrated by Sydney Hansen and published by Workman Kids Publishers. And it's about a little penguin who he loves his friends more than anything in the world, but sometimes they're a little noisy. And so he is looking for a little calm in his noisy world, which is Antarctica. And he doesn't know how to go about it. So he goes and talks to many of his friends, and his friends help him find different ways to handle different situations, different techniques. And in the end, he is able to help his little sister, Pip, who gets herself in a situation. So he can pay it forward.
And a lot of times, anxiety is paired with being antisocial. I also struggle with anxiety, and at times it shuts down my ability to talk to people in public, in public settings at least. Something like online or talking on a podcast I'm fine with, but when I'm with a person face to face, I struggle with it. Can you talk a little bit about approaching this story and making sure to set a clear delineation between dealing with stress and anxiety and not making the character appear antisocial?
Yes. In the very beginning of the book, it starts out, Penguin loved his friends in Antarctica. And there's the darling little picture of him just cuddled up with his friends. But that didn't mean that all of their squawking and splashing and throwing of snowballs doesn't bother him a little bit. So he loves his friends, but he doesn't love the noise. And sometimes he needs to get away a little bit and calm himself down. So there's a big difference there. It being antisocial, he definitely can be. In one of the illustrations, he sticks his head in the snow. And I think we sometimes feel that way when we're stressed, we want to withdraw. And that's Zenguin's way of doing it. But he ends up finding very nice organic ways to handle this and still be friendly with his penguin friends.
And along with sticking his head in the snow, what ways was the penguin trying to cope with stress before he learned from other people how to handle?
Well, he did not understand what was happening to him. And so, there's all this squawking and thumping and cracking of the ice and whooshing of the snowballs, and his heart would pound. And he would then also get a little bit angry, because sometimes when you have anxiety, it makes you angry because you're not understanding it. So he just yells, "Quiet!" And it startles him a little bit, and he walked away and realized he needed to do something about it, but he didn't know what it was. So he called upon his friends. He asked Blue Whale, "How do you look so zen?" And Blue Whale says, "I breathe deeply and let it out." So each animal that he visits teach him a technique. Seal teaches him yoga and moving his body to make him feel good. And Gull shows him that he can garden. He rakes his Zen garden in the snow, and that helps relax him as well.
And for some of these characters, such as Blue Whale with the deep breathing, it seems like it's presented as if this is their one technique that they use. And is this sort of reflecting how sometimes there are techniques that people employ that work for them that may not always work for other people?
Yes, definitely. Sometimes you need to find what works for you, and there are many different ways that you can handle your anxiety with different situations. And it's always nice to know do a little practice when you're feeling happy and you're not anxiety, think about when I have a situation that gives me anxiety, what can I do to handle that? And you can prepare yourself before you actually get there. And that really helps. So, yeah, I think having Zenguin learn different techniques helps him so he can apply them in different situations.
It's almost like running a fire drill. You practice it when there's not a fire, because when there is a fire and you need to employ those tactics, you're not going to be able to stop and assess the situation for what's going to work best. You need to be able to have those techniques already to be able to call upon. So that's why it's important for Zenguin throughout the book to learn these techniques before he is becoming anxious. Do you have any experience with working with young people or children about these kinds of techniques? Have you put these to practice with any students?
No, not with students. I read to the kids all over libraries, schools, that type of thing. But this is my first book on social emotional learning, on anxiety. But I do have a lot of experience with me as a child. I had anxiety when I was a child, as I still do, but I'm able to control it a little bit better now. And I had no idea what it was. I didn't know why my heart was pounding. I didn't know why I was panicking. My parents weren't prepared, although they were very loving parents. They would just say, "Calm down." So I just I think this book is something that I would have liked to have when I was a kid. I would have liked to be able to, I don't know, read Zenguin's story and see how he handles it, so I could maybe mimic that.
So Zenguin feels like it's very personal for you. And with over 25 years of writing experience, how often do you find yourself putting this much of your personal experience into stories that are constrained to such few words per page?
Quite often. I think my background is I grew up in rural Utah on a lot of property, and my father was an animal rehabilitator. So we had a lot of animals in, and so I learned a lot about animals. And so, of course, a lot of my books are about animals. Of course, we didn't have penguins, but we had bobcats and alligators and hawks and snakes. My father was also a falconer. So I do take my experiences and use them in books. I have a book called A Hawk of the Castle, and that one was written also from personal experience. So it happens every once in a while. A lot of my books are just, fun, rhyming board books or picture books that are, just a lot of fun. But sometimes my true life sneaks in there.
And do you find a challenge when having put something onto the page, translating that into something that you can pitch to or turn into a publisher or an editor?
Yes, it was more challenging in the beginning because I wanted to be too wordy. I wanted too many words, and the attention spans are getting shorter, I think, for kids because they have so much on their plates. And so it's really important to have these stories, unlike the long time ago when they were called storybooks and there were like 3,000 words. A picture book nowadays can be anywhere from 300 to 800 words, and that's a perfect size. So I try to stay that way. With Zenguin, it was very important for me to use few words because for me, a lot of words means chaos. So I wanted to calmly tell the story in as few words as possible and not get all tangled up in too many explanations or description.
And you brought up how there was a time when there were storybooks with more words, and that comes from just hearing that, and without looking into it, obviously, that sounds as if it's coming from a context where teaching in classes or at home involved a lot of adults reading to children, and when it comes to picture books having 300 to 800 words. It feels like there's more of a focus of being able to sell this as if it's something that a child can read independently. Is that something that you've noticed going into publishing?
Absolutely. It There used to be a stigma with picture books, and I don't think it's really there anymore. But a lot of kids or parents or grandparents would want their kids to read up into, chapter books and whatever, and that's wonderful. But I don't think there's an end age on a picture book. Even for adults, they can learn something with the art and the words and the rhythm and the lyrical cadence. I think there's a lot to learn there. And so, with that said, children are being read to, and when they're ready to read, yes, they can read this themselves, so they can read it to a younger siblings or even to their parents. But yeah.
And you mentioned reading to a younger sibling. That segues perfectly back to Zenguin, where the young penguin has a little sister by the name of Pip, who also struggles with overstimulation throughout the story, or towards the middle of the story. And that independence of being able to read and being able to read to others is shown here with Penguin teaching what he's learned to his little sister. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of the relationship between them and the importance of being able to explain new concepts as you learn them for children?
Yes. Yes. Zenguin is a little bit older. His sister is younger, and she is just always saying pip, 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 and it drives him crazy a little bit. She's a little noisy, and but he's loving. And when I cast Pip in the story, I thought about my son, who is 6 years older than my daughter, and how kind and loving he was to her. And I feel like that's how Zenguin is. Of course, little sisters can get on your nerves, but they love them and they help them. And so when she gets tangled up in her yarn, which by the way is a great way to relax, she needs help and she's panicking, and Zenguin comes in and says, "This is how we feel Zen," and he teaches her how to breathe through it while he untangles the yarn. And she says, "Pip pip hooray." So she's very happy, and just I think it's just a great relationship between the two.
And that image of having tangled yarn and untangling yarn is a perfect illustration of it's a perfect metaphor for those dealing with that overstimulation and then taking it one bit at a time and unwinding it until you bring it back to order. And I wanted to talk a little bit about when you said that adults can learn from picture books as well. Looking at a book like Zenguin, and when you were writing this, what were some of the messages you were hoping to impart in the adults that might be buying this for their children?
Well, I think that just that it doesn't come anxiety doesn't come with a manuscript or with a manual. I think this is just a great way to sit down, read to the kids, see how Zenguin is feeling, and then open up the conversation. So I think it shows the adults that the kids do need to learn what anxiety is, how to handle it, and they can help them. There's friends and family that can help them with their emotions.
And starting a conversation after the book, that's probably one of the strongest things that I would always say. Spending 5 or 10 minutes to read to a child is already one of the greatest things a parent could do to ensure that a child grows up with a strong connection to their parent or guardian, as well as a connection to reading. But being able to open a dialogue after a book is so much more valuable to instill critical thinking skills. And so, how do you feel with and so where does that come in with Zenguin, including some of the resources at the very back of the book?
Well, I think it's important to ask the children, why do you think Zenguin is feeling that way, and how do you think it made Pip feel when he helped her, and that type of thing. It just really lets the parents know where their kids' minds are, because you read the story, you don't know if they're absorbing it, or what they're taking from it. So the conversation is great. And in the back we do have a page of Finding Calm with Zenguin, and it gives us 4 different techniques to work through with the kids later after the book.
And I love that, specifically asking open-ended questions, but guiding those questions in the way that they're phrased. When I worked in theater, in our program, we had talkback guides in the programs for guardians or teachers to be able to have constructive conversations afterwards, instead of just after the show turning to them and saying, "What do you think?" Ask an open-ended question that narrows in on something specific, like, "What was your favorite part?" Or asking a why question about their personal experience or take on what they just saw. And so with reading Zenguin at libraries, what kind of responses are you getting when you open up a dialogue with young people?
Well, I think when you ask anybody if their heart has ever thumped out their chest, you get a lot of arms raised, and so we're getting that. And in fact, I'm trying to work up some yoga studios that we can go in and do some yoga with the kids. I know my publisher has done a few of those, and they've been great. So I think combining the yoga poses with the book is a great resource as well.
I wanted to ask a question specific to Zenguin that happens a lot in picture books with anthropomorphized animal characters. And that is that throughout Zenguin, we see his friends, and there are some friends like the blue whale that is larger than Zenguin, but we don't see parents throughout the book. Can you talk a little bit about if that was a conscious decision, or if that was just something that happened organically as you were writing the story?
It was conscious. When I write a story about kids, it's for kids, and the last thing they want to see is a parent guiding them in the story. They want to figure things out for themselves. This little Zenguin, if he had a father or a mother telling him what to do, it wouldn't have the same impact as him finding out on his own. So it's very, I guess, purposeful, the way that I keep the adults and the older animals out.
And is that something that you get feedback from either the students that you read to, or maybe some of the educators or librarians?
Yes, it's something I learned a long time ago when I was learning the craft of writing for publication, that you should always have the child figure out the problem himself. There's no savior. You just, they have to just go ahead and figure it out themselves. And that's how life is. A parent can guide somebody, but really the child has to figure it out. This made me feel this way, and when I did this, it made me feel this way. So maybe I should take this, these steps. So yes, it's something that that is taught in the craft, to have the character figure out their own problems.
And Danna, you said the phrase "writing for publication." Can you expound a little bit what you mean by that? Is there a specific approach that authors should be taking when writing with the intention of selling or publishing something?
Yes, there's a big difference. It's sort of like if you draw, you can draw a picture, but if you want to sell it, there's certain rules that you have to follow. So when I was 8 years old, I wrote my first poem, and I've been writing ever since. I wrote a short story when I was 10, I think, and my picture book, in a creative writing class, I wrote a picture book when I was 17. Something I've always wanted to do, and I have stacks and stacks of writing that I could never sell, but it was practice, and it got me, to where I am today. As far as writing for publication, there are word counts, there are certain rules that you can't have the child doing anything dangerous, of course. There are all sorts of rules that you have to put in place, and I guess you have to learn how to use dialogue and the plot, and of course you have to have an arc, which starts with a problem, and then there's it starts with a situation, then there's a problem, and a beginning, middle, and end. So when you write for yourself, you don't have to worry about all this stuff. And even when you do write it for publication, you send it into your agent, and she sends it to an editor. And then if they want to make an offer, oftentimes they will ask you to revise again. Even though you think you have it pretty well honed in, oftentimes that's not quite what they're looking for, or they want to go in another direction. So yeah, you have a lot more revising too when you're writing for publication.
And you mentioned story structure, beginning, middle, and conflict, things like that. Were there any notes, feedback, or maybe just outright guidelines that you were presented with that surprised you when it came to structuring stories when writing for publication?
I think the biggest thing was I'm a poet, so I like to rhyme. Now, Zenguin does not rhyme. It's very lyrical, which I think flows across the page in a very calming way. I think if I rhymed this book, it wouldn't be calming. So, but with that said, I like to rhyme. And when I first started writing for publication, I went to my first conference on writing for children's books, and I was told not to rhyme. And a lot of people are saying editors don't like rhyme, but really what they're saying is they don't like bad rhyme. They like good rhyme. Children love to read books that rhyme. They have this cadence and they know what to expect and they can actually memorize it. So it's really great. So I think that is the one thing that surprised me is when I got there and they said, you shouldn't rhyme. I was thinking, well, no, I'm going to rhyme because that's what I like to read and that's what I like to write. So, but then I learned really why that was. If you can really rhyme well, you're okay.
And you mentioned like sending it off to an editor, and specific to something like being told not to rhyme because of editors saying editors having an informed opinion on what works, what doesn't work when it comes to publishing and selling books. Over your 25-year career writing, have you seen that editors typically, even though their notes can sometimes come off as criticisms, have you seen that their expertise really benefits you as a writer?
Oh, absolutely. They are teachers along the way. One situation I had that was a real wake up call was I sold my first book to Disney Hyperion right out the gate, so I was very excited about that. And then she sent me, and then she asked me if I would send her another manuscript, and then she asked for another one. The editor did, and then she said to me, "You have a lot of great ideas, but you have no idea what to do with them." And that was harsh. That was very harsh for somebody who had just started out writing and wanted to be an author and wanted to publish books so she could share them with the world. But it took me about a day to get over the hurt, and then it's like, yeah, she's right. What this idea is great, but what vehicle does it need to get into to take me to where it goes, to where it needs to go? Is it nonfiction? Is it rhyming? Is it lyrical? Is it about this animal or that animal or a child? So I learned to just stop and think about it. What is the best way? And that editor was harsh, but I learned from her, and I really appreciate now what she said. And I will, to this day, remember that and learn from it.
And so with the writing process being so creative and just free flowing, sometimes getting into the process of writing, you have, like you said, you have great ideas, but you don't know what to do with them. So you're just kind of free flow doing things. Has that reined in your process at all? Do you feel constrained by having to give yourself a destination or an outline, or do you think that that's benefited you as a writer?
No, what I do is I don't limit myself. I have been known to write the same story 3 or 4 different ways. One in rhyme, one not in rhyme, one with this character, one with that character. I think it was The Hawk of the Castle. I had 17 revisions on that, and 3 or 4 different versions. So one was more of a story that I told, one was in rhyme, and I think that's important. It's a lot more work. It adds months to your process, but in the end, you can look back and see what you've actually created and what works the best.
And when it comes to having to do these revisions, do you often, and I know that comparison is the theft of joy, but do you often see other authors or illustrators who put out multiple books throughout a calendar year that seem to have it like refined down to a science that they can just nail out a manuscript and it gets published? Do you reflect on your current style of very open-ended, leading to multiple revisions, or do you think that those revisions and all that work bolsters the finished version?
I think everybody has their own path, and that's my path, and that works for me. So I think it does bolster. It's what works, and so I stick with it. Now some books come a little bit easier, some are harder, but I think everybody has their own path. They do different things to get in the zone, and create, and they do different things while they're creating. And a lot of times it's great to network with other people, like you said, because you get to know their strategies and how they work. And it's great to, and I think the whole of children's book authors and illustrators, everybody is so friendly. Nobody is upset with you for publishing this book or that book. No, they're always just very, helpful. I share books on my Instagram and Twitter of people who have a new book out that I think is amazing, and they do the same. Everybody's very friendly in this business, so that's nice.
And I want to close this out, Danna, with the same question that I ask all authors. It's very open-ended, so feel free to just let this be your final words. To say whatever you wish to say, and that is, Danna, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer?
I see myself as the luckiest woman in the world because I get to do what makes me happy, and I love seeing the faces and of the children I get to share my stories with, and their eyes light up. So, yeah, that's how I see it. It's just a wonderful way to spend the day.
Thank you. That was an interview with Danna Smith. Her new book, Zenguin, is available now. You can learn more about Danna and her work at dannasmithbooks.com. This will conclude another episode of the Book Faire Podcast. If you appreciate the work being done on this show, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, or follow wherever you are currently listening to help push the show out to new listeners. Second, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Book Faire Pod. Lastly, you can follow the show on Patreon at patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is free, and there are no posts hidden behind a paywall. Of course, the best way to help the Book Faire Podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.